Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to give a thank you to the folks at MMB, Commissioner Showalter, Budget Director Mingy, and Dr. Klamakidis. Thank you for kind of updating where we're at. I think in a summarizing what they said, this is a good position for Minnesota to be in. I want to thank all the folks out there over the last couple of years that has been very difficult, both economically, from a health perspective, and then just socially, things have gone through. And this has been a roller coaster. These are usually perfunctory. After November, they're usually relatively predictable. That is not the case. And if you recall, in early 2020, when we very cautiously had a one-page supplemental budget because of the unknowns that were there. And I think from Minnesotans' economic fortitude during the pandemic, to the handling of the pandemic, and to where we are today, this is good news for Minnesotans. Some of you who've done this for a long time know that nothing MMB does is not by chance. They deliberately put things up here. I'm going to assume that our slide is spring that's coming, and I think that's probably appropriate today. This is the first time we've been in this room that felt a little bit like pre-COVID for many of us. The numbers today on COVID front are as good as they've been since last August. In some cases, better than it's been the whole time. There's every reason to believe that from hospitalizations to vaccination rates to a return to most basic economic activities, we're exactly on the right path. And what this gives us is an opportunity as Minnesotans to make sure that we're investing in Minnesotans right now. And I'll make my case again. This gives us the opportunity to get those checks right in the hands of folks now. This new number on there, we can triple those, and the numbers that we're looking at is about $500 a person, $1,000 to a couple. That's money right now. That's a difference. It's the one-time money that comes out. We're able to do that. And then we're able to look at those long-term ways to reduce costs. And I think there's a lot of space in here for compromise. You're hearing some of the ideological things. That's exactly appropriate for the legislature, and we do it. I am fully aware that we're going to have to compromise together. The good news is we can compromise on a whole lot of fronts to make life cheaper for Minnesotans, both now and in the future. We can continue to invest in things like education and healthcare, reducing those costs, making them more accessible to folks that improve quality of life, and then continuing to make sure that we're keeping up with our infrastructure through bonding and other things. That's a good position to be in. So we can do a little of both. It's not either or. To make those costs, make those reductions, make them both immediate, and then make some of the long-term reductions that need to go into this. I'm excited about this. I think the idea that the things that you see us kind of debating about, I would ask the legislature, it sure seems like after today and where you hear about the money that's in the bank versus some of the projections, we're in a place right now where two priorities that have been out there for quite some time, replenishing the UI Trust Fund and getting the hero pay out to folks, those would be an important thing for a lot of folks. Been very bipartisan. We agreed last legislative session to do the hero pay. We've got more capacity to do that now, so we don't have to pick and choose as much. We include those folks who are on the front line, whether they be processing food or whether they be healthcare workers, long-term care workers. There's a lot of agreement there. And then the UI Trust Fund gives us the ability to provide stability for those folks. It worked at the time that we needed it, and it'll be ready if we need it again. We've done all this by having historic rainy day funds in place. We've done it responsively. We continue to make those investments. So I have to tell you today, it seems right. I will acknowledge, as you heard here, the illegal and absolutely unacceptable invasion of Ukraine by Russia throws the world economy into a bit of uncertainty. We know especially around fuel prices that are impacting Minnesota's families. So there is macro level economics that are happening on this. Minnesota has to take a look at that, but we're also well positioned for a micro level of getting money in the hands of Minnesotans right now, reducing those costs again, child care, health care, some of those, reducing long-term costs. I think it's absolutely appropriate, and we have those things in there, child tax credits, child tax reductions, other things that are being looked at. There's a lot of great ideas out there right now that both put Minnesota's families in a better position, but don't jeopardize our long-term future. And we'll get a better idea of what happens. I think you're going to see hopefully a quick and peaceful reconciliation to the situation in the Ukraine, but a continued trajectory on an endemic state to COVID-19 also lets us. You're already seeing the return back to work. You're seeing some of the things that we knew would start to happen. So uncertainty, yes, but a solid position, ability to get this done right, a lot of collaboration, and I think agreement, what I'm seeing come out of legislative proposals to do what's right for Minnesota. So I'll be glad to take any questions. Again, you've got some of the more in-depth briefs here, but we'll try and go with it. I'll go in the back. Go ahead.
Talk about triple the checks. Would you elaborate on that a little bit? Who and when? How
Yeah,
much?
we had about 3.8 million folks in there. We put those out. I think this direct payment right now, especially what we're seeing, you saw it today already. Energy costs are very dependent globally. We know some of the strains that are in the supply chains and other things, but the geopolitics of what's happening in Europe, it's without a doubt we're going to see gas prices go back up again. You heard the briefs on this. We're going to see a leveling out of inflation, but it's going to take a little bit. It'll probably be into the third or fourth quarter of this year. And I think the reason that the checks make such a difference now is you can put a significant amount of money in the hands. It's about $1,000 a couple or so right now. Many of those folks would be the same folks who would receive the hero pay up to about $1,500. And then some of the tax cuts that are being proposed, they'd see as an ongoing basis. I don't think those things put us at jeopardy of our long-term stability in our budgeting, but they also do a quick one-time money into the hands of folks as we look towards summer. So with this new amount that's in there, we go back and look again. So it's about, as I said, an individual, about 500, a couple would receive about 1,000, and that includes the vast majority of Minnesotans. You're going to see a lot. Yep.
Governor, I know you mentioned you want the legislature to do unemployment trust fund and hero checks with this money. The deadline for the uninsurance trust fund backfilling that is 2 weeks away. Do you think the House should go ahead and just act on that and get that done, even if the hero deal isn't worked out?
They should do them together, and I think we asked last week, and I was told by Senate leadership that they weren't that interested in the hero pay. That's fine. I mean, it's an ideology. If they don't believe that, they said it was a smaller slice. But this is about what compromise does. I think both of those things need to be done. And I think the idea, and I'm hearing come out of folks that we're looking forward. Yes, we're all looking forward, but there's a recognition that COVID and the impact it had was not equally spread out, and that there was some of these folks that we had this agreement last May that we should try and take care of them. I just think it makes sense in any of these things. These are two things that a vast majority of folks on both sides of the aisle agree on. They are both economically sound decisions because we know that hero pay will work as a stimulus too, and especially for those families. So I would not going to get involved with the negotiating between the House and the Senate, but I would say if Minnesotans are listening on this, we can do all of this stuff. It's not that hard. Couple things together, make a few compromises around that, get those things done. They need to get done. We know we can't dig in, and I proposed the idea around the UI. I asked for the hero checks consistently through the fall that we got done. And if you recall, the reason we couldn't do that was because there was a threats during the Omicron and the Delta surge of the health commissioner being that. That is now out of the picture. So I don't know why we wouldn't just take care of that. So I would just encourage them to do that. I won't say whether they should pick one or the other, but it's a smart thing to do. Sean?
Governor, in light of the war in Ukraine and the impact it may have on our state budget, are you willing to follow the actions of your fellow Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey and call for a boycott of all Russian products and call upon Speaker Hortman, Senator Miller, and as well as your declared opponents from the Republican Senate, Senator Gazalka and Benson, to put forward legislation that have a structured boycott against Russia, as well as calling for the investment board to meet and divest of any Minnesota portfolio that it has with Russian ties? And are you willing to go as far as suspending the visas for Russian students in our colleges and universities? Donald Trump set the stage for this in his presidency, kowtowing to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, my guess is I don't think I would assume that, again, having traveled enough and worked on foreign policy enough, don't associate citizens with their governments in many cases. And I would say the case of this, that we know that our students that are here, I think that's probably a step that I don't think makes a lot of sense. But this whole idea about how do we make sure Russia's being punished, it's going to be, of course, on a broader scale. There are going to be the economic sanctions. And again, very cognizant that Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs are not going to feel pain. The average Russian is going to, many of whom are courageously in the streets protesting about this illegal incursion into Ukraine. As far as state investments go, I've asked our teams to take a look at some of this. We know that we have right now, the State Board of Investments has two areas where we have disinvestment and that we continue to monitor. That's with the nation of Sudan and Iran as we stand right now. So there's an opportunity to go ahead and take a look at that. We have a fiduciary responsibility responsibility, but I want to be clear, hiding behind a fiduciary responsibility, and this is what you'll see some nations do, rather than making sure that we're taking the actions necessary that aren't just to be symbolic, but actually force changes. So I think right now, expelling Russian students are here, many of whom would be, my guess is, may end up deciding that this is the place they want to live, this is the place that they'd rather stay. I don't think that gets at it, but I do think it makes sense to look at some of these other proposals. I don't know what those investments are directly. I'm seeing some folks bring this up, but I don't know if their State Board of Investments functions the same way as ours. I don't know what kind of investments they have. Tom?
Governor, last week Republicans proposed pretty massive income tax cuts. I'm certain you won't go as far as they wanted to go, but is there room, given this forecast, for some across the board?
Yeah, absolutely. I have it in mind. Absolutely. I think the question that you're going to see here, and it's just going to be, this is ideological. I don't even say it as a pejorative. You're going to see the Republican proposals will make sure that those tax cuts go clear to the very top. So when you cut the first tax bracket, which I think we're certainly willing to take a look at some of that, that applies to everyone all the way up. They could structure that to exclude tiers 3 and 4. They could structure it to exclude changes to, say, the estate tax of, 20 people who end up falling in that. We'll see if that happens. But I think focusing on working families like we have, that does make sense. And I think, again, structurally, I have to be very careful of these folks coming up here, because when they hear us say that, because we know what happens, slight twists in that, say a quarter or a half percentage point, which I think it makes sense for us to start talking about what can we do, especially for working Minnesotans. What does that do long term? What are the long-term costs? So I think the original proposal, the first piece of that came out, is several $billion. That would be several $1 billion every year that would be ongoing. But just to be clear, that first chunk of money that we make, and that number would be reduced far down in the tax cuts you receive for many Minnesotans, that would go all the way to the richest Minnesotan would also see a tax cut. I think I'm fine, and I think there's space in here for us to talk about that, but I think it needs to be crafted in a way where you're excluding those top brackets. Yeah, go ahead.
Governor, you said at the top that this is good news for Minnesota, and I'm pretty sure we're going to hear from Senator Miller something along the lines of that the state of Minnesota has been over-collecting its taxes. We've got a state budget that is a surplus about 17% of the entire state budget. And can you see the argument on the flip side? I mean, how is that necessarily a good thing to have collected almost 18% more?
It's a simplistic, if you listen to the presentations here. So again, just to be clear, we've also had these, and I know that the standard reaction is tax cut on this. We've also seen that when there's been massive deficits. I'm not saying we don't do some of this, but the data doesn't show that. What we saw was increased spending, increased behaviors that were out, especially on the corporate tax cut. There's also about $500 million in savings that the state of Minnesota did not spend. So I'm not saying that we can't try and put this into, get it into a little more balance. But again, I want to remind everyone, January of 2020, when I said, no, let's freeze in place, the same tax cut was proposed then, which would have led to billions in deficit spending. So I'm not saying that there's not some room there, but I think just the knee-jerk reaction to tell them that this is just a gross over taxation. I do say that revenues are up, so let's return it. And I think that there's a mix here. Let's return a chunk of it in one time, and then let's take a stab at some of the working class folks, some cuts that are in their child tax credit. I'm willing to look at their the first tier look, as long as we're excluding some of the wealthier Minnesotans. But to just say simply is that, again, I recall, since I've been governor, we've lowered taxes. We've not raised them. What changed was the environment that's out there. And just to be clear, all of you have covered this. If this were a deficit, they would be blaming one person. Because it's a surplus, apparently has thousands of mothers and fathers, but deficits have one. So I think my job is to make sure state government continues to function on that. But I do think it's a fair point to say, now is the time to help those families out. Let's do a little bit. That's why I keep coming back to this. We are not that far apart. We are not that far apart on some of the things that we can do, and there's a lot of agreement. And I think if we went into this session less of a political messaging session and more of a brass tacks, let's get this done and say, you know what, because I know I'm not getting everything I put in the budget. I recognize that. But to come into these negotiations just, nope, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we can't get there. There's plenty of room.
Governor, Governor, I've got a question here back behind the photographers.
Sure.
Will you do a formal supplemental to your supplemental? If so, when? And what is your thinking going in as far as one-time kind of expenditures versus some of the ongoing expenditures such as long-term care, staffing that have come up? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a balance, and that's why I think this approach to moving Minnesota forward is better than if this is, we're not doing anything else, we're not doing hero checks, we're not doing direct payment checks right now, we're just doing tax cuts permanent on there. I don't think it's a balanced approach. It'd just be like your own portfolio, measuring it between your 401k or some of it in stocks and bonds or others in the stock market, whatever, trying to balance it out. So I think in answer to that, Peter, we'll go back because, again, I received this briefing at the same time that the legislators receive it. My team starts to tear through this summer, whatever. I believe it was at 10:30 this morning we talked. I do think maybe it makes sense, as I said, in first blush, running numbers on that. I think we can triple those checks we talked about, and I think it created more space to have discussions around some of these other things. But what I don't want to see is, I don't want us pulling money for tax cuts to the wealthiest Minnesotans at a time when we know that there's things we need to invest in, especially around education, healthcare costs, those. And you can do it all. You truly at this point in time can do it and not leave deficits going into the future. So I think it's a balanced approach. We haven't said whether it'll be officially. I think what you'll see, Peter, is us to go back, look at those numbers, kind of reconfigure what we came out with the first time and put that out again. That does make sense. There's no, in these off-year budgets, there's no official time when we need to do that, but I do think that makes sense because we're starting to see now, which is good. We saw Republican proposals come out. We're seeing Democratic proposals in the House come out, and that's the way this is supposed to work. Now we start meshing them together. Petty, we might have time for another one.
If, Governor,
Yes.
right over here.
Yeah, sorry.
If there is $4 billion in the bank already, how much of that, or is there an additional amount? How much do you think is appropriate to spend right away?
Well, I'm going to wait till we get this. This is a question I asked this morning on this, what's in the bank and the complexity of what you can expect numbers coming in. I think what you need to do is you need to make sure you're not at this point in time till we start to get a little more clarity, especially with the Ukraine situation. I think you need to focus pretty heavily on the one-times. I do think it's appropriate to repay the UI Trust Fund. I think those hero pay, I think some one-time things. I think we ought to slow a bit here, and we'll get some clarity, I think, over the next month or two about what long time looks in that, and then have that. So right now, I'm being pretty careful that what we're proposing is one time. It meets what's in the bank. It doesn't commit us for long-term commitments that we can't already pay for. But some of you did the math on this. If this would continue on, I think we proposed right around $9 or $10 billion worth of costs, and this starts to come in line. Now, I remind everybody, I know you're looking at this, the legislature is still sitting on $1.2 billion of COVID relief funds that need to be appropriated this year that were not appropriated out, both for the relief of COVID, and it has quite a bit of needs in that. So in the 9.2, you can actually add the 1.2 to that, so it's the 10.4 that we're looking at. And I think we're trying to stay, what we're proposing, that money that goes out meets what money that's in the bank. Yes.
Following Bill's earlier question on the rebates, did you say this summer? So even if the legislature agreed to do some sort of rebate check like May 15th, right, the last week of session, you think that realistically?
I asked this question. I don't want to put Commissioner Doty, we're in his house and he's here. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I asked him what he'd do. His team is prepared to do this because I asked them early. I said, if I propose these, because I feel very strongly about this, you know, you can politically try and make whatever case you want about why inflation's there or gas prices are going up. I think folks who see the global economy connected know it's a little complex. But when you're an individual family member and gas went up 14 cents today because of the Russians invading Ukraine, money in your hands right now. So my thing to him is, I certainly want them to do it correctly, but I said, start thinking about and build the infrastructure ahead of time so that when we get this thing through, these things can move. And I told him, just to be, and I don't want to put him on the spot, I said, people need this here before summer. This is the times they're thinking about it. Kids are getting ready for summer. I mean, these are $1,000 or another $1,500 on that. Now you can go to camp, you can pay for the gas, you can do some things. And that, again, with rising wages, because the story in the paper today is Target's going to start paying $24 an hour starting wage for many of these jobs. That's the other side of this thing, that if we can give some stability right now and then talk about some of those long-term reductions in costs, whether they be in taxation, child care tax credit, or give them some certainty around health care and child care. That's what we're hearing time and time again. So we can do that. We can get it out quick. I'm not going to put them on the spot. for the moment, but just to be clear, I've made it clear. I have a sense of urgency around this. I don't want to wait. I don't want to see this. I don't want it to go into next year. Let's get these things done right now. That's the reason they've been waiting and preparing for these hero checks. The minute that passes, we're going to start processing them.
Thanks. Governor, I didn't hear you talk at all about increasing spending. You've got a Democratic constituency out there who wants to see more spending on programs from health insurance to child care, all sorts of things. What's the deal?
Oh, we do. I'm certainly going to, that's what I said. And there's plenty to go around on both. I'm not going to give tax cuts to the top end of things, but I'm certainly want to make sure that we're investing both in childcare. We know that that's a big piece of this. We know upping those rates. We're hearing from the business community that it's a top priority of theirs. Investments into education that we know that work. And many of these are one-time. We've got a little bit of long-term investments there, but all of that balances out. So the question's going to be here is, should we provide immediate relief? Should we provide long-term cost savings to working families? Should we invest in education? Should we invest and talk about a bonding bill to get done and all that? Or should we give all of a tax cut with some of it going to, a big chunk going to the top? I think that's the only ideological split that's happening right now, because I think you're going to see legislators are hearing from their folks all over that they just simply want us to get this package done. And so, yes, there's some in there. I certainly want it to be there, but I'm going to caution those folks that I believe in. We need to be very cautious about creating new, ongoing long-term spending. And that coin is it has two sides of this. When they did the 2018 tax cuts or whatever, nobody wants to figure that as a cost. That has a long-term cost. When you cut taxes, that is long-term costs and spending. And I said, if we create new programs, we need to be very clear about what that's going to be. So we've been pretty, I think, disciplined about not creating a long-term tails problem. And I think that's what bodes well. After listening to this presentation, I think there's every reason to be optimistic, but over these last 2 years, here we are with maybe the biggest conflict since World War II in Europe. We're coming out of a global pandemic, but we have to see what's next, and we have to prepare for that, and I think it's good to be prudent. But I want to thank you. I want to thank this team up here for doing the work they did, and it's good to see you all back in this room again and actually see a lot of faces, so thank you.